Hey guys, Taylor here. This week kicks off a special series of episodes called Universal Deep Dives, a Q&A format where just Kenneth and myself delve into a single topic with no guests to drive the discussion. Unfortunately, the program we used for this week's recording chewed up our master audio track, and the resulting output is pretty muddy. I've touched it up the best I can, but if you skip over this one, I completely understand. If you can push through, we have just about an hour discussing our personal coping mechanisms and how we have overcome loss in our personal journeys. Next week, we'll be back with another guest and the usual audio quality present in episodes 1 through 5. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
If you had to tell one story that summed up who you were as a person, who you are for sure as a person, tell that story.
When I wake up every morning, I try and be more efficient than I was yesterday, and I try and be less of a piece of shit than I was yesterday. So if I can get answers to those two questions, I come out a better person at the end of it.
You can't put people in buckets, right? We all are a culmination of our experiences in our past and stuff like that, but we all have a brain, which kind of makes it hard for us to put anyone in a bucket because everyone is vastly different.
Welcome to No Universal Answers to the Universe, a video podcast and interview series with your hosts Taylor Hall and Kenneth Givens. We have no guests this week. We're going to do a deep dive Q&A, just us, diving into a particular topic. And Kenneth, what is the name of this session? Because I do not remember it.
I think we're going to start calling these the Universal Deep Dive.
Cool. So Universal Deep Dives will be on off weeks when we don't have guests and can really focus in on one or two particular topics. So what are we here to talk about tonight?
So tonight we're going to talk about how we separate ourselves from darker situations, kind of the vices that we've used in the past, the coping mechanisms that we've also used, how those have changed over time, and pretty much how have we in the past pulled ourselves out of holes.
And that's been a common theme of the episode so far, is once we get to know each guest, try and figure out where they've stumbled in the past, and more importantly, how they've risen back out of it. So this is our chance to kind of give our 2 cents on the piece. So we have a couple of listener questions that we've received via social media the past couple weeks we're going to lead in with, and then kind of really get to the meat and potatoes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first get to know your host questions from our guest is Randy Lamons. His question is, at what point in your life will you be able to say, I made it? So he says specifically work-related. So Taylor, if you want to take that one first.
So I'm hoping eventually to make it to an IT project manager role. So when I finally made it to where I can be juggling one to a number of projects and not have to be boots on the ground, physically typing code, that's when I feel like I've made it. When I can finally use my logistical skills to the ability that I feel like I'm capable of. How about yourself?
Okay. For me, that's a hard one. I think for me to actually sit back and say I made it, I would have to be like a president, vice president, CEO level person of my company. Or realistically, if I ever get around to finishing a book, if I ever get a book published, even if it's just one, I'll probably take a step back and appreciate that. So,
could you ever see yourself becoming a full-time author, or is that delegated to a non-professional enterprise?
No, absolutely. So if something takes off and I'm able to write full-time and make as much money as I do now, that absolutely, no offense to anybody I work with or anything like that, I absolutely enjoy what I do. But dream job is, being on the beach or being in a cabin in the woods in the mountains somewhere writing books.
Nice.
So our second guest question is from Andrew Josephate, somebody that Taylor and I worked with at camp. His question is, what is your dream job? And he actually had 2 questions, so we'll start with that one.
I mean, we pretty much went over it. I'm hoping to be an organizer more than a producer. So regardless of whether I'm in the IT field or not, I feel like holding the marionette strings is where my strengths lie.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I went over that too. Dream job for me would obviously to be the HBIC per se of my company or for me to be a full-time author. So the second part of his question is something that'll kind of, I guess, lead a little bit into our discussion tonight. He said, if you have to change one decision you have made in the last 10 years, what would it be, and what would the effects be of that reversal?
So mine's a controversial one and goes against what our parents pointed us to. I wouldn't go to college.
Okay.
I would reverse back to high school and enter the workforce, because I had multiple internships for different programming organizations up at the point that I graduated high school. I had an apprenticeship at 14, and I had coding work going up through like age 17, 18. And if I had done that, I'd have 5 more years of work history on my resume, and I'd have $30,000 less in debt. And I see no reason, even with the opportunities that I have now, that the degree has not aided me in those opportunities in the slightest, other than possibly just getting my foot in the door and having my resume be considered. After that, it has not been applicable up to this point.
Okay, that makes sense. For me, all the decisions you make lead you to where you're at currently. I'd probably say that my biggest regret, if I had one, would be I wish I had spent more time, my friendship with my absolute best friend. We kind of, I don't want to say drifted apart, but for lack of a better phrase, we kind of drifted apart when I went off to college. He stayed at home and has been working ever since, and I wish that we had remained close. I mean, when we get together, it's like we've never been apart. So it's not just from a personal perspective, it's more or less from like just being there for each other type deal. So that's probably the biggest one. And if I was to reverse that, I think we'd probably both be better off. With that being said, our theme for this evening's podcast is kind of walking through our vices and our coping mechanisms of how we've pulled ourselves out of some bad situations and some dark times in the past. What are some darker situations or even a failure per se that you've experienced, Taylor?
My largest one would be, I think it was 2015 to 2017, where I was at college. They canceled my degree program, and 300 of us essentially got told, pick a new program or drop out. I picked an English degree. I signed up for a bunch of film classes, didn't show up to class, dropped out, and started working retail. And that led down the path of, for a calendar year, I was walking 2.5 miles to work, 2.5 miles back from work, walking like 11 to 12 miles on the clock, doing physical labor at a hardware store. And that broke me down to the point that I did not realize that rock bottom could be that low. I thought I had rock bottom, and then I went through bedrock a little bit during that year and a half. Okay.
How did you pull yourself out of that? And do you feel like, not just with this one instance, but do you feel like across the board, when you get to that point, do you allow yourself to get too low, right? We always talk about, like, when you have successes, sometimes you might get too high off of that success and kind of get high and mighty on yourself and get a little maybe conceited or cocky, but do you feel like you have gotten too low from those points?
Oh, absolutely. It is only by the grace of my immediate family that I got out of that particular situation. Is they let me move back home 3 hours away and got me set back on the track to finish my degree at a different university, and I finished that last December, and now have been working an office job instead of a physical job that was breaking my body down piece by piece.
Okay. For me, I'd say a pretty rock bottom for me was, after I graduated from college, the university I was going to offered me a free ride to come back and get my master's. I was, really hyped up about that. I was like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's free. You might as well. But they don't tell you, things until later, like they'll cover your student fees and stuff like that. So, like, the Friday before all of your fees are due, they're like, oh, you owe over $1,000 by Monday. And then I'm like, whoa, like, what are you talking about? Also, before that, they had actually delayed me a semester because my professor who was offering me the free ride, you lose 5 months of your life. And I couldn't sign a lease because I was like, I don't have any way of affording that. So during that time period, essentially, like, I was homeless, Spent some nights in my car. It ended up, with Ruben and Randy and Mascana and Zach and the apartment where I was going to be paying rent. And they were like, you can stay on the couch. Once I got, two jobs, actually, I was working at Jimmy John's and Pizza Hut. Once I had those two jobs, I was able to pay for like the power bill and stuff like that. But I was like, living on somebody's couch. And I would say during that time period, they were all very, very supportive. They've always been the type of people that say like, Kenneth, you're going to make it places. And they've always been like the type of friends to like build you up. I had an engineering degree and I was working at Jimmy John's and Pizza Hut with a car that was breaking down consistently, and I was living on their couch. I mean, that was rock bottom. And everybody was like, "Oh man, like you take it so well." And to be honest, I probably did take it better than I would. I remain very, very positive, but I will tell you, like, very, very bad habits that I had for a long time, like, drinking a lot, obviously, is one of the things that I do during that time period. I drank as heavy as I think I ever have in my entire life. I mean, it was like, get up at, 5 a.m., go to the gym. Once I did actually start classes before I got booted for not being able to pay student fees in that time period, it was like, go to claclasses, go to Jimmy John's, get off Jimmy John's, go home, eat, take a nap sometimes, go to Pizza Hut, close at Pizza Hut at like, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, meet Randy and them at the bar for last call, spend all my tips from the night, drinking, come home, play True American, which if you don't know what True American is, it's from the show New Girl, and it's essentially a big game of the floor is hot lava, and all your living furniture is the game board, and you are the game piece, and you're drinking the whole time, and it's terrific. But I mean, like, it was like every night, and you're sitting there and you're drinking, 12 to 16 beers, and between the 4 or 5 of you, you're drinking a fifth or two of liquor on like a daily basis, So I would say that definitely instead of letting my low affect me emotionally or being distraught about it, I was happy. And it wasn't like a form of depression I was feeling internally. Like, I felt fine, I felt happy, but I definitely let things slide that probably were not the healthiest things.
Now, how was that balancing that whole schedule? Because it seems from an exterior perspective to be a cognitive dissonance. On paper, you're doing everything right. You're waking up early, you're exercising, you're educating yourself, you're working 2 jobs. Anybody could kind of regularly excuse recreational activities after that, but obviously looking back, you can tell that you were consuming to an unhealthy degree. How did it feel being essentially a productive American for the first 12 to 16 hours of the day, and then kind of falling off at the end of it? Did that create any sort of internal conflict, or is that just the rhythm that you were in?
I don't know. I think it was the rhythm I was in. I personally don't think I could physically do that now. But I have also thought that before, and also done that when I was on the road working with Denzel, where, we'd work 90 hours in a week, for 4 or 5 weeks in a row. But like, you'd have like that random Saturday after working 31 straight days where you like got off at noon, and then you sat there at a bar. I sat there at a bar in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and from noon until 2 o'clock in the morning, I drank 2 bottles of liquor, And by the way, Green Bay is a great place to drink because I spent like $12. I felt physically and mentally obliterated, but I did not feel that until after it was done. In the moment, I was fine, and it was more or less like, you're holding on to that strand and it's pulling you along, and then like it breaks, and that's when you realize that your legs have been dragging for the last 3 weeks. Like it just felt like that. Like I didn't feel exhausted until it was over. I real job using my degree, working on the road with Denzel, and they were like, you start in 2 weeks. So I went to Tab's place in Augusta, and like during those 2 weeks, the first 3 or 4 days, I was toast. I was tired, lethargic, couldn't move, on the couch all day. Went through all of Brandon Sanderson's classes on YouTube of how to write not a fantasy novel, and started a new book. It was like I could only let myself rest for those 3 or 4 days, but I was completely wiped during those 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I had the same thing after I left that retail position at my Charlotte store. They would have me working 3 to 3, and then I would walk home at 4:30 in the morning. I'd make it back, and I'd have to be back at the store at 10 o'clock in the morning, the dreaded clopen. And I could not do that if you put a gun to my head at this point. I don't know how I did it 2 years ago.
Right. So like when I was on the road, me and Denzel's schedule was like you gotta be at the job site at 5:30 a.m. Okay, but sometimes you could be 15 minutes from the job site, and on some job sites, the closest hotel's 45 minutes away. So then you got to factor in the drive. You get there at 5:30 a.m. Some of these plants, you actually have to get bussed in the gate, and the buses run every 5 minutes, and it takes them 10 minutes to get into the plant to your office. So then you got to factor in, I actually got to get there at 5:10 so that I can get to the office by 5:30. So like, then it gets to this point where you're like, oh wow, I'm waking up at 3:45 in the morning to get to this place by 5. You work from 5:30 in the morning until 6:30 or 7 at night every day, like for literally 30 something days in a row. And like the first couple of days, Denzel's like, let's go to the gym. And then by like day 5, you're like trying not to fall asleep on your drive home. You know, it's like there was nights where like we didn't even eat dinner because it's just like I'm too tired to wait for something to microwave at the hotel. You know, and we were trying to save money, and I didn't even have money yet because it was the first job we were on. So like I had a pull-out couch that literally was like a half-inch pad on top of metal bars. So like, it wasn't even like I was able to sleep comfortably or rest. I mean, it was miserable. And I feel like now I don't want to go back to that. And it got better, don't get me wrong. And the pay was very nice. But it's just like now I can be at home in my bed at least half of the time.
So that's a good pivot to a slightly more positive aspect. How do you get a breath of fresh air both physically and mentally when you're having to push like that? When the adrenaline is running low, what recharges your batteries?
For me, it's really hard because like I'm not good at sitting around. I'm really bad at it. Like me sitting around is like I'm gonna watch a 5,000 level course from BYU that a famous author is teaching about writing a novel. Like that's me relaxing. It's like me researching something or me learning something. I will say this: when I was on the road, I read almost nil. Like I might have read one book in the entire 2.5 years I worked at that company, because it just like mentally you're drained, physically you're drained. On projects like that, I would literally get up, go to work, come home. The little bit of reprieve that me and Denzel had was like Denzel would like, I won't say force me, I was glad he made me do it, but like we would play a video game for like 45 minutes to an hour on some nights. And that was like the highlight of my week. Okay. So like that was nice. Now, once Denzel's no longer on the road, I fell back into old habits. And like when I was out in California, me and my crew were at Buffalo Wild Wings. They legitimately bought more Jägermeister bottles after we had been there for like 3 weeks, because we would buy at least a fifth of Jaeger every single night. And they were like, we can't keep going through this much Jaeger. Like, you guys want more to drink and we don't have it. So like they started buying handles of it, and like they would have multiple. And like we would go in there every night. Other things I did on the weekends there was like I would go to the movie theater Saturday morning when they opened at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I would see 4 movies in a day. I don't know. I still wasn't reading, but I was just like either drinking, or the only other reprieve that I had on the road was like going to the movies. How about you?
This is going to be the nerdiest answer I give all night, but I am who I am. Dungeons & Dragons has been my out for 5 or 6 years now. I've been running games for like 10, 11 years, but I don't write long form like you and my brother do. I'll never be a novelist. I've attempted short stories before. I've ran NaNoWriMo twice and failed twice, but that is my short burst. I can sit down every 2 weeks and dedicate 4 to 6 hours to write a vignette, to write a story arc. And that, between putting it together and then sitting down with close friends and watching that story play out with their input, it's not a static story, it's a dynamic one. That's how I get my creative outlet. And I can pour everything positive and negative that I've experienced in that 2-week window between games into creating that. and that has been my consistent out for like 5 or 6 years now.
That's impressive. I would say that like I really enjoy being a part of like your D&D stories. I oftentimes feel bad because I know you spend 4 to 6 hours on those stories, and I can't tell you how many times where we're like, we're going to go left here, and you're like, oh my God, I wrote 4 or 6 hours worth of information of you guys going right. Like, what the hell? So, like, it's impressive, and you have a great attitude towards us, even when we do stuff like that.
The improvisational skills are something that I can take out of it. It's not part of the reprieve that the game brings to me, but it has certainly allowed me to think on my feet a little bit stronger.
I don't know if you feel this way. When you're doing stuff like that, like when I was getting up at 4:45 in the morning to be at the gym at 5 a.m., working 2 jobs, going to 2 classes, and then drinking late at night with my friends. And now what I do now is like I struggle to get up at 6:30, and then like I come home at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and it's like I'm gonna cut the TV on, we're gonna have dinner, we're gonna watch TV, and then we're gonna go to bed, right? And it's just, I feel like part of the reason why we're doing this podcast, or at least for me, is like I wanted something in my schedule that's like, you need to get up and like do something, because I don't know, when there's nothing, like when your back's not against the wall, there's nothing pushing you, that's when I struggle, right? I don't want to say being forced to do something, but like setting those goals and holding myself to them, I really enjoy. I feel like I can accomplish so much in a 16-hour period of time because I have.
Now, let's unpack that a little bit, because both of us have, when crunch time is required, we can crunch until the sun comes up and goes back down. So, in your own opinion, creating artificial deadlines, do they have the same level of intensity and to kind of create the same level of drive? Or in the back of your head, do you know it's an artificial deadline and don't push quite as hard as if it was like an exterior deadline? I phrased that improperly, but I think you get the idea.
No, I get it. It's not so much as artificial versus natural, or however mine's more internal versus external. I had never had to set internal goals because, I don't know, it just throughout my life, the goals are always set externally. And I perform so much better that way. Like, for instance, I have the tattoo on my leg of 7%, writing that paper my freshman year of college. I realized that there was, based on how I grew up, my situation, where I was at, our money, all that good stuff, there was less than a 7% chance that I would graduate from college in 4 years. Boom. That's not a target that I set, but I saw that and I was like, absolutely, I'm going to do this in 4 years, and absolutely, I'm going to be the best person to do it. But I didn't set, at least I don't feel like I set that goal, right? That was just a goal that was out there. Or like playing sports, when someone was like, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound bad, like, this is literally how I felt as a child. But like when kids from the rich side of town were like, oh, you poor people are going to play sports with us? Oh, yeah, we have all the best stuff. You guys don't even have, a $20 bat, and I have a $300 bat. We're so much better than you. Boom. Goal set that I didn't set for myself. I am now going to literally wipe the ground with these kids with my $20 bat, and I'm going to laugh at them. And that, like, to me, it was not a goal that I was setting. It was a goal that was already kind of naturally out there externally. When I got to a point in time in my life where I was like, I need to write, 10,000 words a week, I've struggled so hard because there's no one in the background. There's no one in the back of my mind saying I can't do it. There's no one out there that's like trash talking me or like pushing me. Like I was always the person with the coach who, like, when they yelled at me and talked trash, I did way better. That was what I needed. Oh, and I'm expected to be able to manage my own goals, myself. I struggle really hard with that.
Now, can you artificially create those external motivators? Look at authors that inspire you, look at their literal, like, daily word count and their sales numbers, and say, I can beat that? Or is that layer of competition not exist in the realms that you put yourself in as an adult?
It doesn't feel the same. Like, so this podcast, having you as a co-host, has been absolutely great because, like, we've had all kinds of issues about how we couldn't keep our schedule, but we're making sure that we're hitting everything weekly, right? I feel pushed to accomplish that. I'm very excited about it. So, like, that's been really cool, and we've gotten very positive feedback from people, but realistically, it's been like, I know Taylor's going to be on this call at 7:30. I have to be on this call at 7:30, right? Just like when, like, I was in Green Bay and I got a personal trainer before my wedding, I know how to work out. I know all the, different tricks of the trade, not a problem. I actually put on muscle pretty quickly. I'm an exomorph, so I also put on fat really quickly, unfortunately. But like, I understand that. I understand the dietary needs that I have to have. I literally paid somebody, a personal trainer. I literally just paid somebody that would hold me accountable. That is all I did. So I'm sitting there spending money so that somebody is like going to hold me to being there every single day. And it worked. I mean, I was in the gym for 30 days before my wedding, and I lost 30 pounds. So like, there's, in my opinion, no secret to success except for like, you just got to do it. But for me, I need something pushing me, right? Something other than me pushing me. I know it's really sad.
Perfect follow-up to that. If there's one part of your life right now that you could hire a trainer for, what would you kind of monetarily want to incentivize?
Oh, absolutely, the gym.
Oh, so that would still be the number one avenue for that.
Yeah, because when I was going to the gym, and I think this is a whole, like a large reason why I was able to do it in college. When I was going to the gym in the mornings with a personal trainer, even I would work a 14-hour day. I would go back to my hotel room when I was in Green Bay. That was a time period where I was sending you Snapchats of me rapping. I was sending you like Snapchats of lyrics that I was putting together. I was writing. I was reading. That was like the first time where I was on the road where I was actually doing those things. And it happened to be the last job I did with my old company. I was no longer lethargic. You know, I was working the same hours. I was getting up just as early to be there. I was going to the gym every day. But the going to the gym every day and eating healthy, I felt so much more alive. I only needed 4 hours of sleep because it was a good 4 hours of sleep. I struggle real hard with sleeping. So if I don't wear myself out, when I go to sleep, I'm restless. So I will be in bed for 6 or 7 hours. I will probably get 3, maybe 3.5 hours worth of good sleep. Whereas before, I would wear myself out so much that when I was in bed for 4 hours, I was getting 4 hours of sleep, you know? So that also played a role in it.
So let's pivot from some of the lower points to some more successful ones. In the past 5 to 10 years, when have you really felt the most successful? What's 2 or 3 bullet points of, if you had a metaphorical trophy shelf, what has your life produced in terms of accomplishments that you really think shine?
For me, it wouldn't even be metaphorical. At Georgia Southern, I was a member of the American Society for Civil Engineers, and then I was the project manager, which was a position that the officers created for me because they wanted me to be an officer. I think in like 1980 or 81, Georgia Southern won a surveying trophy at the annual competition. The only trophy we had ever won. Each year there's like 12 to 15 competitions. I say competitions, it's one big competition, but there's like 12 to 15 events, I guess is what you would say. We won a trophy in 80 or 81 for surveying. My junior year, we won a trophy for concrete shuffleboard. We're super excited. Out of 26 schools in the Southeast, which includes like Alabama, Miami, UNC, some of the bigger engineering schools, right? We finished like 17th or 18th out of 26 schools, which is like the highest we ever finished. My senior year, I was elected president. That year, there was 26 schools. 14 schools had a budget of $50,000 or more. Our budget was less than $5,000. And that year was the second year that we competed in all events, which included making a concrete canoe, making a steel bridge. I personally wrote the professional paper and had to do a presentation at competition. That year we won 4 trophies, and we finished 9th out of 26 schools, which means we beat at least 5 schools whose budget was 10 times as much as our budget was. We were at the award ceremony on the last day. They had put Georgia Southern off in a corner in the very back of the room. We had already been pre-gaming. Our professors were drinking with us. I'll leave it at that. We had played some beer pong back at the hotel already. I was wearing my very spiffy white suit that I like to wear to events back then. And the first trophy we won was the professional paper, which I specifically did by myself. And we got second place. And when they said Georgia Southern, I didn't even know what to say. Denzel leaned over to me and he's like, "Yeah, that's you. That's you, you know?" And I'm like, oh, shit. We brought like 48 students with us, which was the most we ever brought. They chanted Georgia Southern in the background. You couldn't even hear who won because they were so loud. I get this trophy, and it's a blur. Like, I don't even remember taking the picture with it. On my way back to my seat, we finished in second place in another competition. So I'm like, oh, my God, what's going on here? You know, On the way back to their seat, we placed third in the next competition. And then we placed third in the next competition. So all 4 of our trophies were back to back to back. They literally had to get on the microphone and tell us to be quiet. So we were the people at the party who had never won before. It was very, very obvious and evident. It was that shining achievement. And like we went back, it was one of those situations where like I had worked personally very hard for that, and I knew that everyone else had worked really hard. Everyone's cheering me, everyone wants to drink with me, and they're like, man, Kenneth, you really did it. Like, I felt like I was put on a pedestal. Part of me was like, we all did this, but part of me also was like, I want to enjoy this because I don't know when I'll ever be able to feel this again. What about you?
So the number one thing in recent memory, when I left that same store that I was pulling the 3 to 3 shifts, when I announced that I was moving back to Raleigh to go back to college, my immediate manager was super happy for me. She was great. But our store manager at the time pulled me into the office with HR and just went off on me that he would never be able to replace me, and he was going to have to find 2 or 3 people to fill my shoes. And while I'm getting yelled at, I'm like smiling ear to ear. Like, yeah, no, you don't like the amount of impact that I had at that building. I had suspected it, and I had been given prime shifts because I was able to make moves, but no one had ever formally confirmed it in so like concrete a way that right. Even though this guy is like negatively expressing emotion, he's completely validating the amount of effort and the countless hours that I had put on that sales floor. So that would be the number one. I think with the time we've got left, we should probably pivot to the last couple of things we've got. Same thing that we ask all of our guests on the podcast. What would you tell your 13-year-old self and your 18-year-old self, specifically in this case, how to make it through those harder times? Because you described your early childhood seemed to be the hardest, and it's steadily gotten better as you make your way from then till now. So what would you tell your 13-year-old self for coping mechanisms?
So 13-year-old me, 7, 8, and 9-year-old me went anger management classes and had an anger management mentor. It didn't catch on until really I've become more mellow. I think a lot of it has to do with Tab, honestly. I've become a lot more mellow over the last 6 years, probably. I don't want to give myself too much credit to it because I did let loose several times in college even, but I would tell 13-year-old self, like, I was holding on to a lot. I didn't necessarily know that I was holding on to it, and I didn't know what I was holding on to, and to this day I really don't know what I was holding on to, but I feel more grounded now, and I can tell you now I'm not holding on to whatever that was, right? I would tell that 13-year-old self to let go, loosen up. I was always tense, for no reason, just always tense. Just like relax a little bit is what I would tell 13-year-old me. 18-year-old me, I would tell to calm down. Because like 13-year-old me, you're a teenager, you're going through puberty, you get mad, you haul off and you punch somebody, fine. 18-year-old Kenneth who hauls off and punch somebody, you can go to jail. You can get in a lot more trouble. A lot of times, from what I found out, people who pick fights don't know how to fight. You beat somebody up bad enough, and then it becomes a whole different charge. Whatever. It could become even as far as like attempted murder, less because you're trying to kill somebody and more because the other person can't fight. I feel like that's trash. If you can't fight, don't pick a fight, But I would definitely tell 18-year-old Kenneth, calm down, take a deep breath. I had to tell myself that sometimes now. Fortunately enough, now that I'm absolutely crazy, I do listen to myself when I'm talking to myself, so that does help.
That's one of my favorite Sam LaChow lines. He's an artist out of Seattle. I've never won in a fight, but I'm always stepping on sneakers. There's a certain level of pride that we all bring to altercations.
It's really funny. It is really funny because it happens. Like people, I can tell you a lot of stories about people who just like pick fights with you, and then when you're like, all right, let's do this, they're like, oh no, I was joking, and you're just like, now I'm all worked up. Now where do I put all this aggression? What would you tell 13 and 18-year-old Taylor specifically about handling dark times?
So 13-year-old Taylor, this is going to sound really dark, but I come from a very dark place. I would tell him, you're going to have friends one day. Being homeschooled and only having church and 4-H connections, at best, your friends are the children of your mom's friends. That is the most you got, and when your mom doesn't have those networks, You just do not have social interactions outside the house or the church. So just telling him you're going to have friends one day, but you're not going to have those friends forever. You need to get good at the process of networking and making friends, kind of how we discussed on the episode with Melissa. Everything comes in seasons. Don't, when you find somebody, cling to that person desperately. Hold on loosely, but don't let go. Get used to the cycle that life is. Because that's something that I just had a kind of slow start to. And 18-year-old self is just reinforcing that everything in high school is complete fiction, because the second you're out of high school, you finally get to start making decisions. Yeah. Everything looking back just felt super scripted through all 4 years.
Well, that might be good. I don't know. Mine didn't feel scripted, but it definitely was not. You want to say it's not real, but it was obviously real, but it was like nothing came of it. Nothing long lasting. I mean, friends, but like nothing real of any value outside of that came from it. By the way, to your first point, you can tell 13-year-old Taylor, you're stuck with me, so I'm holding on and I'm stronger, so good luck.
Well, that's a perfect pivot. How do you feel that you've changed since grade school? Let's take middle school Kenneth to today. What is the most significant thing or two that has changed about your personality?
I will not fight you if you talk about my mother now, because for sure, middle school Kenneth, I got kicked out of the bus more than once because literally somebody said, your mama. That was all it took back then. Personality as a whole, I have a much more calm demeanor. Like to think I laugh just as much as I did then now, so I just don't let people get under my skin. I would say that I'm a lot more open. Middle school Kenneth I was not necessarily open to other people's ideas or ways of life or how they wanted to live and the personal decisions that they were making, have any exposure to it. Now that I've had exposure to some things, I realize that the most important thing is for you to just be who you are. Like, I'm good with that, and that's been a big change for me. So I would say like those are probably the two biggest things about my personality that have changed since middle school. What about you?
So mine speaks again very close to some of the closing remarks that Melissa had. Her and my backgrounds were very similar with the exception of some of the parenting styles that she underwent. Today, Taylor can express when he's feeling uncomfortable and can leave a situation if it's just not the right vibe or the right people or the right place. When I was younger, because I didn't feel like I had that agency, I would just go stone face and just internalize while negative situations were going and just let things rain down and then unhealthily kind of vent later. And now I can just sense that I'm in a place that I shouldn't be or I don't want to be. I can just get up and leave. That is a wonderful part of being an adult. I can take the keys to my car and I can drive somewhere else.
That's got to be pretty difficult. Like when you're stuck in situations that you don't want to be in. I would say I've never felt that way socially. I've definitely felt that way as a child, being somewhere where you don't want to be. It's definitely not a social situation. I don't know, as a child, I would get up and leave. So I would say that's got to be really, really tough. Would you say that like you use some of these coping mechanisms we've been talking about to try and deal with those issues growing up, or did you just try and like move on after the fact and ignore it or forget about it?
No, there was a good, probably close to a decade period where I just bottled, and that bottle got so pressurized that when I left for college, straight off the deep end, and it took me like 2 years to really rein it back in and realize that some of these motivators and goals and standards that I had for myself before that were imposed on me by outside forces, I really need to personally enforce. There's not every restriction is bad, not every goal and motivator is bad. Finding that agency took some time. That's why I have to extricate from myself from situations now to avoid bottling again, because I have a shorter fuse now than when I did then, and I have less of a capacity to bottle and hold things in than I used to. So knowing that that is a shallower tank, I have to just keep it very cognizant of keeping myself in a good place.
On to happier things here. What are your 5-year goal plans and what are your 10-year plans? Share with me what they are for work, but also share with me what are some plans and goals that you have outside of work for those two time periods.
5 years from now at work, I would love to be running projects, hopefully up in Boston, if this move works out all right. Kind of getting myself past that entry-level position. I've restarted so many different career paths, and I've been an entry-level worker in so many different venues. I want to make it past that. I want to get my feet anchored and really thrive somewhere. And 10 years from now would be achieving my, I guess, shorter term financial goals of having a house and a car paid off in a year in savings. That is my definition of financial independence, and that's what I'm shooting for regardless of what industry I do end up working in.
Okay. Well, what about outside of work?
Outside of work, shout out to the woman who taught me what I know, Quantisha Mason. I want to have a forge in my backyard, and I want to return to blacksmithing. It is the coolest artistic expression that I've ever been able to participate in, and I want to get back to it as soon as I have the land to build another forge.
She taught me how to forge as well. So I absolutely love blacksmithing. If you haven't seen it, you should watch Forged in Fire. It's a show about blacksmithing, and it's terrific. What about your 10-year goal?
10-year goals goes back to the first time that I got Phantom and self-educated. I would love to become an American Kennel Club certified dog trainer and be able to do mental and physical therapy on damaged animals.
Awesome.
So I don't have the personal time or energy or facilities in terms of house to really pick that up now, but that is longer term. Once I am solidified and financially independent, would love to chase that.
We don't have any hopes of becoming licensed, but if Tabitha has her way, we'll have at least 10 dogs. So I'm a big dog person. I think 2 is a good number. Tab thinks that 2 is a good number for us to keep in our room. So we'll have to go from there. So for me, 5-year goal and 10-year goal for work. 5-year goal, I want to be at the next level. I want to be a senior project manager. I know that's a pretty lofty goal because that's normally a 15 to 20 years in the business. And in 5 years, that'd put me right about the 10-year mark. You know, I have been the youngest project manager at my old company, in their history, and I moved up pretty quickly where I'm at now. I think I can do it. 10-year goal would be to be on the cusp, maybe within striking distance of an upper level and executive position. Whether it's vice president, president, somewhere in there. Our company doesn't work in a manner of which where you go from vice president to president. It's kind of like they're 2 separate positions and they manage 2 separate things. So I would definitely, as far as my company goes, would want to be on the vice president side. 10 years is probably for sure a stretch for that, but I want to set the goals high and try and hit them, or at least, like I said, come within striking distance. Personal life, kind of like what I talked about earlier. Within the next 5 years, I want to finish at least 2 or 3 books, and I want to have 1 published. Whether I self-publish it and it sells 7 copies to my closest friends, that's less of a concern to me. I want to be able to say I did it, and I want to put out something that's good. 10-year goal on that side of things would be for sure, again, setting lofty goals. Within 10 years, I'd love to be selling enough books to where I don't have to necessarily work if I don't want to, outside of writing. Part of me still thinks that I would still work because I'm not very good, again, at sitting around. So that's kind of where I'm at.
When you finally get your picture on the jacket of a book, you better wear that white suit from the awards ceremony.
Oh, don't worry. I will. Tab will hate every second of it. I wanted to hear this, as a closing remark here. What were your earliest thoughts or memories of meeting me, and how do you think us meeting each other has changed your life, if it has at all?
Okay, so I'm going to make you blush here because you mean quite a bit to me. Out of all the people I've met in 25 and a half years on this planet, there's been about 5 or 6 that have stood out to me that are pillars and champions of a particular virtue. And since I met you the first day at camp, you have had more potential. Call it potential energy, call it prospects, call it motivation. You have had more potential than anyone that I've ever met. And I've always just kept in the back of my mind, this dude is going places. Even if I can keep an acquaintance level contact, my life will benefit because of it. And that has been literally since day one.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. I would say that my first memory and thought of you were very quiet and slightly standoffish. So immediately for me, if you know me, I was like, man, this guy's going to be my friend. I'm going to make sure that this guy is my friend. I have always tried to be friends with the people who didn't look like they want to be friends with anybody, because I was like, that's a personal challenge. Again, natural challenge there. But once I met you and we hung out and we went places with Thomas Saunders and went places with Jonah and Andy, it was very clear you're probably one of the absolute most intelligent people I've ever met. And you challenged me in ways from a discussional standpoint, from a deep dive into life. You challenged me in so many ways, and like I've really, really grown. And there's not many people who have made me grow and made me not only become a better person, but like have a better understanding of what it's like to be someone other than me. Because it's hard in this day and this time period to put yourself in other people's shoes. And I would say that by far you have made me grow a lot in comparison to just about anybody else that I've met. Like you, I know I joke around and we all called you IT Taylor, but you are, and now I understand why, because you started coding at 7. I learned that last week. You are phenomenal. I mean, apartment here, and I was like, man, I'm having issues with the internet. So you just hack into their account and fix it. I mean, I was like, what? Like that just happened, you know? And it's stuff that like you only think happens in the movies, and then Taylor's like, nah, I can do that for sure, you know? But from a very deep place, I'll be honest, you are for sure one of my best friends. And again, you have challenged me in all the right ways to be a better person. So I do appreciate it.
And as our perfect send-off, thank you guys for joining us on this special episode of No Universal Answers to the Universe, and we'll be back next week with another guest. Have a good night.
No Universal Answers to the Universe is an interview series by Taylor Hall and Kenneth Gibbons, which releases on YouTube and all podcast platforms every Monday. If you have any questions or would be interested in being a guest on the show, please contact us at nouniversalanswers@gmail.com or via our Instagram page at no_universal_answers. Thank you for listening and have a great night.